They called him the Ghost. It wasn't a name born of respect, not a call sign whispered in awe over crackling radios in the dark. At Northwood General Hospital's emergency department, it was a mark of dismissal. Elias Vance was the Ghost because he was practically invisible, a man who seemed to fade into the beige, peeling walls of the underfunded ER. For 3 years, he had manned the reception desk on the night shift, a fixture as unremarkable as the flickering fluorescent light above his head. He answered phones with a quiet, raspy voice, filed paperwork with hands that bore a faint, constant tremor, and moved through the controlled chaos with a slight, shuffling limp. He was the man they sent to mop up spills no one else wanted to touch, the one who endured the casual cruelty of the overworked and the arrogant with a placid, unnerving silence. They saw the worn, perpetually tired look in his pale blue eyes, the shabby grey scrubs that always seemed a size too big for his wiry frame, the way he flinched at loud noises. They saw weakness. They saw a man worn down by life, a piece of human driftwood washed up on the shores of their frantic world. They didn't know that the rasp in his voice was the remnant of a shredded vocal cord, damaged by the concussive force of a rocket-propelled grenade. They didn't know the tremor in his hands wasn't from age or fear, but the residual nerve damage from gripping a dying soldier's artery closed for 17 hours in a dusty ditch in Kandahar. They didn't know his limp was the lasting kiss of a sniper's bullet that had shattered his femur, an injury sustained while dragging his entire squad out of a kill zone under heavy fire. And most of all, they didn't know about Dr. Alastair Finch, or rather, they knew him all too well. But they didn't expect that his reign of petty tyranny was about to collide with a force of nature he couldn't possibly comprehend. They couldn't have fathomed that the quiet man Finch used as his personal whipping boy was about to become the only thing standing between them and a violent, bloody end. Elias Vance wasn't a ghost because he was insignificant. He was a ghost because he had spent years learning how to be unseen, how to move through the world without a trace, a skill honed in places that made this ER look like a playground. Tonight, the ghosts of his past were coming, and they were about to remind everyone what his name once meant. Dr. Alastair Finch, head of emergency medicine, swept through the double doors of the ER like a conquering hero returning to his kingdom. His white coat was so pristine it seemed to repel the ambient grime of the hospital. A gold Rolex gleamed on his wrist as he gestured impatiently. His black Italian leather shoes made no sound on the linoleum, a stark contrast to the squeak and scuff of everyone else's worn-out sneakers. He was handsome in a severe, joyless way, his jaw perpetually tight with the effort of maintaining his air of superiority. "Vance," he barked, his voice echoing in the relative lull of the early evening. The sound cut through the low hum of monitors and the distant cough of a patient in the waiting room. Elias looked up from a stack of insurance forms. "Yes, Dr. Finch?" His voice was barely a whisper, the words raspy and soft. Finch stalked to the reception desk, a fortress of cheap laminate and plexiglass that Elias called home for 8 hours a night. He slapped a palm on the counter, the sound making a junior nurse jump. "This coffee," Finch said, gesturing to the paper cup in his other hand, "is lukewarm. It tastes like battery acid and despair. Is it really that difficult to brew a fresh pot? Is that task beyond the scope of your formidable abilities?" A sycophantic charge nurse named Brenda, who orbited Finch like a hungry moon, let out a tittering laugh. "He probably made it last night, Doctor." Finch smiled, a thin, predatory slash. "Probably. What do we even pay you for, Ghost? You're about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. The insult was tired, one Finch had used at least a dozen times before, but Brenda and another aide chuckled on cue. Elias didn't react. His expression remained placid, his eyes giving nothing away. Inside, however, a switch flipped. A memory, cold and sharp, surfaced unbidden. The taste of lukewarm, gritty water from a canteen, shared among four men, huddled in the freezing dark of a mountain pass. It had tasted like life itself. He could almost feel the phantom weight of the 80-pound pack on his shoulders, the icy metal of his rifle against his cheek. The world of Northwood General dissolved for a split second, replaced by the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush under a star-dusted sky. The air, thick with the smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner, was momentarily replaced by the scent of pine, cold rock, and fear. He blinked. The ER snapped back into focus. Finch was still there, sneering. "Well, are you going to answer me, or are you just going to stare into space? Go make a fresh pot. Now." "Yes, sir," Elias rasped. He rose slowly, his right leg stiff. The limp was more pronounced tonight, a dull ache radiating from the old injury, a barometer for the coming rain. He moved towards the small break room, his back straight, his shoulders squared in a way that no one ever seemed to notice. He was a ghost, after all, and ghosts carried their worlds within them, unseen, unheard, until the moment they chose to become solid. Tonight, a storm was brewing, both outside the hospital walls and deep within the quiet man they all thought they knew. The air was heavy, charged with something more than just humidity. It felt like a countdown. The geography of the Northwood General ER was a map of institutional neglect. The waiting room chairs had rips in their vinyl upholstery, patched over with grey duct tape. The triage area was separated from the main floor by a curtain that was missing half its hooks, affording little privacy. The main floor itself was a cramped, chaotic landscape of gurneys, rolling IV poles, and portable heart monitors. The pride of the department, Trauma Bay 1 and Trauma Bay 2, were glass-enclosed rooms at the far end, perpetually prepped for the worst the city could offer. Elias's reception desk stood as a lonely outpost near the main sliding doors, the first and last point of contact for the river of human misery that flowed through them each night. It gave him a clear view of everything. He saw it all. Finch had moved on from tormenting Elias about the coffee to berating a young resident, Dr. Chen, over a misplaced chart. "Do you have any idea how inefficient this is?" Finch's voice was loud, performative. He wanted everyone to witness his command. "This paperwork is the lifeblood of our billing department. Your inability to correctly file a simple document costs this hospital money. Real money. Money that, I might add, pays your not insignificant salary." Doctor Chen, a book-smart but visibly nervous young man, stammered an apology. "I'm sorry, Doctor. It was a chaotic intake. I must have—" "Excuses are the currency of the incompetent, Chen," Finch snapped, tossing the chart onto the counter in front of Elias. "Vance, refile this, and try not to screw it up." "Yes, sir," Elias said, his voice a low hum. He took the chart, his fingers brushing over the laminated edges. He glanced at the patient's name, the diagnosis. Acute appendicitis. He noted the vitals, the prescribed course of treatment. Standard. Correct. But he also noticed a small, handwritten note from the admitting paramedic about a known allergy to a common latex derivative used in some surgical gloves. The note was almost illegible, tucked away in a corner of the form. An easy thing to miss. Elias took a small sticky note, wrote, "Caution, latex allergy," in neat block letters, and affixed it prominently to the front of the chart before filing it away. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because it was the right thing to do. It was part of a code he lived by. A code forged in places where missing a small detail didn't lead to a lawsuit, but to a flag-draped coffin. Later, while mopping up a trail of blood from a bar fight victim, the sharp, chemical tang of the bleach cleaner hit the back of his throat. The world tilted again. This time, the memory was more vivid, more visceral. Not the clean scent of a hospital, but the coppery sweet smell of blood mixed with the acrid stench of cordite and burning diesel. He was in a makeshift field hospital, a bombed-out schoolhouse outside Fallujah. The air was thick with dust and the screams of the wounded. He was on his knees, his hands deep inside a young Marine's chest cavity, trying to manually massage a heart that had stopped beating. The bleach smell was the closest thing his mind could find to the antiseptic wash they had used, a desperate attempt to bring sterility to a world of filth and death. He could feel the slick, horrifying texture of the organ under his fingers, the frantic energy of his own movements, the voice of his senior officer shouting, "Leave him, Ghost! He's gone!" He hadn't left him. He had stayed, pumping that heart with his own hands until a faint, fluttering beat returned. A rolling cart bumped into his leg, jarring him back to the present. Nurse Brenda shot him a venomous look. "Watch where you're standing, Ghost. You're in the way." Elias simply nodded and moved aside, the mop handle clutched in his trembling hand. The tremor was worse now. He took a slow, deep breath, centering himself. In, hold, out. In, hold, out. A simple breathing exercise to control the adrenaline, to push the ghosts back into their box. He was Elias Vance, receptionist. That's all. He had to be. The alternative was too dangerous for everyone. But as he finished cleaning, he saw a small drama unfold. A mother had brought in her 6-year-old daughter with a suspected broken arm. The girl was crying, terrified. Finch approached them with the bedside manner of a drill sergeant. "All right, let's see it. Stop crying, it doesn't help." The girl only cried harder. While Finch was busy impressing the mother with a litany of medical jargon, Elias quietly walked to a supply closet. He retrieved a pediatric splint, the one decorated with cartoon animals, and a small, plush bear they kept for distressed children. He placed them on a cart near the examination room, just out of sight. A few minutes later, a harried-looking junior nurse, flustered by Finch's demands, rushed out looking for a splint. She saw the one Elias had left, her eyes widening in surprise and relief. She glanced over at Elias, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She grabbed the splint and the bear and hurried back into the room. A moment later, the child's crying subsided, replaced by a soft murmur. No one else saw. No one else knew. For the ghost, that was just fine. The true test of a man like Alistair Finch wasn't in the day-to-day squabbles over coffee or paperwork. It was in the crucible of a genuine crisis. That crisis arrived on the back of a screeching ambulance just after 10 p.m. A multi-car pileup on the interstate during a sudden downpour had overwhelmed the city's emergency services. The first victim to arrive at Northwood was critical. A male, mid-40s, driver of the lead car. The paramedics rattled off the vitals as they burst through the doors, a litany of disaster. Multiple fractures, severe head trauma, and suspected internal bleeding. BP is 80/50 and dropping fast. The ER, which had been in a state of low-grade hum, exploded into frantic, purposeful action. Everyone, that is, except Finch. He thrived on this kind of chaos, seeing it as a stage for his own brilliance. "Get him into Trauma 1, now!" he bellowed, striding alongside the gurney. "Page surgery, get me a full trauma panel, and someone get me some gloves, stat!" He was the conductor of a symphony of desperation, and he loved the sound of it. But he was a poor conductor. In his haste to appear decisive, he was missing the obvious. As the team transferred the patient to the trauma bed, Elias watched from his desk. He wasn't looking at the flurry of activity. He was looking at the patient. He saw the rapid, shallow breathing. He saw the slight but unmistakable swelling on one side of the man's neck, the veins standing out like cords. He saw the way the man's Adam's apple was pushed slightly off-center. And he saw the numbers on the heart monitor, the oxygen saturation plummeting despite the mask they'd placed on his face. Tension pneumothorax. A collapsed lung was pumping air into the chest cavity with every breath, compressing the heart and the other lung. It was a simple diagnosis for a trained eye, and fatal within minutes if left untreated. Finch, however, was focused on the abdomen, convinced the primary issue was internal bleeding. "His belly is rigid. He's bleeding out. We need to get him to an OR," he shouted, ordering an ultrasound machine to be brought in. "His SATs are dropping to 85%, doctor," a nurse called out, her voice tight with panic. "Increase the oxygen flow," Finch commanded, not taking his eyes off the man's abdomen. Elias knew they didn't have time. The ultrasound, the trip to the OR, the man would be dead before they got there. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine. It was the same feeling he'd had watching a green lieutenant ignore his warning about an IED. He had watched that man die. He would not watch another. Breaking his own rigid code of silence, he got up from his desk and walked calmly but quickly towards the periphery of the chaos in Trauma Bay 1. He didn't approach Finch directly. He knew that would be useless, a direct challenge to the man's fragile ego. Instead, he spotted the young resident, Dr. Chen, who was struggling to get an IV line into the patient's arm. Elias moved to his side, his presence so quiet that Chen didn't notice him at first. "Sir," Elias murmured, his voice a low rasp, barely audible above the beeping monitors. "Check for tracheal deviation. Feel his neck. Left side." He used the deferential term, "sir," to soften the instruction, framing it as a suggestion from a subordinate. Dr. Chen, his hands shaking, glanced at Elias, his eyes wide with confusion. A receptionist? But there was a certainty in Elias's gaze, an intensity that cut through the panic. Something made him listen. He quickly reached to the patient's neck, his fingers probing gently. His eyes shot open in alarm. "Tracheal deviation! It's shifted to the right!" he yelled, his voice cracking, "and no breath sounds on the left side." The diagnosis was suddenly, terrifyingly clear to everyone. Tension pneumothorax. Finch froze, the ultrasound wand hovering over the patient's belly. He looked from the monitor to the patient's neck, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. He had been caught, his focus on the wrong injury in front of his entire staff. But his arrogance was a fortress. He recovered in a split second. "Exactly," he boomed, as if this had been his plan all along. "I was just testing you, Chen. Good job. Now don't just stand there. Get me a 14-gauge needle. We're doing a needle decompression. Move!" He snatched the large-bore needle from a nurse and, with a flourish, plunged it into the patient's chest in the second intercostal space. There was a hiss of escaping air, like a punctured tire. Immediately, The oxygen saturation on the monitor began to climb. 86, 89, 92. The patient's breathing eased. Finch had saved his life, but everyone in that room knew he had almost cost it. And they knew somehow that the quiet receptionist had been the one to avert the disaster. Finch, however, would not let that stand. Later, after the patient was stabilized and sent to surgery, he cornered Elias by the vending machines. There were no witnesses this time. He backed Elias against the wall, his face inches away, his breath smelling of stale, expensive coffee. "You think you're clever, don't you, Ghost?" he hissed, his voice a low, venomous snarl. The performative boom was gone, replaced by something much uglier. "You got lucky. You read something in a magazine once. That's all that was." He jabbed a finger into Elias's chest. "You are a receptionist. You push paper and you answer phones. You are a nobody. You ever step out of your lane like that again, I will not just fire you. I will personally see to it that the only job you can get is cleaning toilets with your tongue. Do you understand me?" Elias stared back, his pale eyes unblinking. He didn't speak. He just held Finch's furious gaze until the doctor, unnerved by the lack of fear, finally broke away. "I said, do you understand me?" Finch repeated, his voice rising. A long, silent moment passed. Then, Elias gave a single, slow nod. "Yes, sir," he rasped. He watched Finch storm away, the pristine white coat billowing behind him like a cape. The injustice of it all settled in Elias's gut, a cold, heavy weight. It wasn't the humiliation that bothered him. He had endured far worse from far more dangerous men. It was the incompetence, the arrogance that put a patient's life at risk. That was the one thing he could not abide. He leaned against the vending machine, the tremor in his hands more pronounced than ever. The ghosts were getting louder. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke just before midnight. Rain lashed against the ER's large plate glass windows in thick, wind-driven sheets. The sound was a constant, percussive drumming, a soundtrack for the misery within. It had been a brutal night, a relentless parade of car accidents, domestic disputes, and flu-ridden patients. The staff was exhausted, running on fumes and caffeine. The atmosphere was frayed, tense. And then, the automatic doors slid open with a soft pneumatic hiss, and the nature of the night changed irrevocably. It wasn't a gurney bursting in. It wasn't a panicked family member. It was 3 men. They didn't run or shout. They walked in with a slow, deliberate purpose that was far more terrifying than any frantic entrance. Water dripped from their cheap raincoats, pooling on the freshly mopped linoleum floor. The man in the lead was broad-shouldered, his face a roadmap of bad decisions and cheap liquor. A crude, faded spiderweb tattoo crawled up his neck from beneath his collar, a jailhouse classic. The man on his left was younger, wiry, with eyes that darted everywhere, taking in the room with a nervous, predatory energy. The third man, lagging slightly behind, was big and dull-looking, a slab of muscle that followed orders. Elias, from his post at the reception desk, felt it before he saw it. A change in the air. The pressure in the room shifted. It was a feeling he recognized instantly, a primal instinct honed over 1,000 hostile encounters. This was not a social call. His hand, which had been resting on his mouse, moved slowly, imperceptibly, to the edge of his desk. His posture, which had been a tired slump moments before, straightened. The exhaustion vanished from his eyes, replaced by a crystalline, diamond-hard focus. He was no longer Elias Vance, receptionist. He was assessing threats. The leader's eyes swept the waiting room, dismissing the huddled, miserable patients. He was looking for something specific, or someone. Elias's mind raced. An hour earlier, they'd brought in a young man named Rico, a known gang member, with 2 shallow stab wounds to his side. He'd been patched up and was waiting in a curtained-off bay for a police escort to arrive. They were here to finish the job. The leader's gaze fell on the nurse's station, then locked onto a security guard, a portly man named Dave, who was more of a deterrent than a genuine threat. The leader's hand went inside his coat. Elias saw the movement, the deliberate pull of fabric. He knew what was coming. Slowly, the leader drew a gun. It wasn't a small pistol. It was a big, ugly, semi-automatic, matte black and menacing. He didn't point it at anyone yet. He just held it. Then, with a deliberate, theatrical motion, he racked the slide. The sound, schlick-schlack, was like a thunderclap in the confined space. It was a sound of finality. A woman in the waiting room screamed, a high, piercing shriek that shattered the tense silence. That was the spark. "Nobody move!" the leader roared, his voice rough. "Everybody on the floor, now!" Panic, pure and unreasoning, erupted. People scrambled from their chairs, tripping over each other. A nurse dropped a metal tray, which clattered to the ground with a deafening crash. The gunman fed on the fear, growing bolder. The wiry one pulled his own smaller pistol, waving it wildly. "I said shut up! Get down!" Dr. Finch, who had just emerged from his office, froze in the doorway. The color drained from his face. His mask of arrogant command dissolved into raw, naked terror. He didn't shout orders. He didn't try to take control. He made a small, pathetic, whimpering sound and dove behind a large potted plant near his office door, pulling his expensive coat over his head as if it could make him invisible. Elias, however, did not get on the floor. He remained at his desk, perfectly still. He watched the 3 men. He clocked their positions. Leader, Gunman 1, was 10 feet from the door, focused on the cowering crowd. Wiry 1, Gunman 2, was moving towards the nurse's station, his attention split. The big one, Gunman 3, was starting to move towards the patient bays, towards Rico. They were sloppy, overconfident. Their trigger discipline was non-existent. They were amateurs playing at being hard men, and that made them dangerously unpredictable. Elias's mind became a cold, clear calculator. He measured distances. He noted potential weapons of opportunity. The heavy-duty stapler on his desk, a fire extinguisher on the wall, the rolling steel IV pole. 9 seconds. That's what his training screamed at him. From the moment of initiation to neutralization, he had a 9-second window before they could fully orient and bring overwhelming force to bear. His heart rate didn't spike. It steadied, a slow, powerful drumbeat. Thump, thump, thump. The world seemed to slow down, the frantic screams fading into a distant buzz. It was time to go to work. The 9 seconds began with a child's cry. A little boy, separated from his mother in the panic, sat on the floor and wailed. The sound, sharp and pure, cut through the leader's bravado. For a single, fatal second, Gunman 1 glanced towards the noise, his focus broken. It was the only invitation Elias needed. Seconds 1 to 3. He didn't stand up. He exploded. With a single, powerful shove of his good leg, he sent his entire reception desk, a solid block of oak laminate and steel, sliding across the polished floor. It weighed at least 200 pounds, a battering ram on wheels. It slammed directly into the knees of Gunman 3, the heavy muscle who was lumbering towards the patient bays. The man's legs buckled with a wet, crunching sound. He howled, not in rage, but in agony, as he collapsed forward. As he fell, Elias was already in motion, a grey blur vaulting over the corner of the desk he had just launched. His hand, the one with the tremor, shot out and snatched the heavy-duty swing-line stapler from the desktop. The tremor was gone. His grip was iron. He brought the solid metal block down in a short, brutal arc, not on the man's skull, that could be lethal and messy, but on the temporal bone, just behind the eye. The impact point was precise, calculated to induce immediate unconsciousness. There was a dull, sickening thud. Gunman 3 went limp, hitting the floor like a sack of cement. One down. Seconds 4 to 6. The wiry gunman, Gunman 2, spun around at the sound, his eyes wide with shock. He raised his pistol, his finger tightening on the trigger, but he was reacting to where Elias had been. Elias was already on him. He didn't try to grab the gun, a classic mistake. That creates a struggle. Instead, he moved inside the arc of the weapon. His left hand, fingers rigid like a spear, drove straight into the man's suprasternal notch, the soft hollow at the base of the throat. It's a devastatingly effective pressure point. The man's body reacted involuntarily. He gasped, a choked, strangled sound, his back arching in pure agony as his central nervous system overloaded. His gun hand went momentarily limp. In that instant, Elias's right hand snaked around the man's wrist. He didn't just twist. He applied a specific, shearing pressure, using the man's own momentum against him. A loud, wet crack echoed through the ER. The sound of the radius and ulna snapping. The pistol clattered uselessly to the linoleum. The man screamed, a high, thin sound of pain, and Elias finished the sequence with a vicious, perfectly placed elbow strike to the point of the jaw. The man's head snapped to the side, his eyes rolled back, and he crumpled to the floor. 2 down. Seconds 7 to 9. The leader, Gunman 1, finally overcame his split-second distraction. He roared an incoherent curse and swiveled, bringing his heavy automatic to bear on the space where Elias now stood. He was faster than the other two. He fired. The gunshot was an apocalyptic boom that dwarfed every other sound. The bullet tore through the air, punching a fist-sized hole in the drywall where Elias's head had been a fraction of a second before. Plaster dust filled the air. But Elias was already moving, closing the distance, a fundamental rule of engagement against a ranged weapon in close quarters. He hadn't tried to dodge the bullet, he had simply not been there when it arrived. Before the leader could fire again, Elias's left hand shot out and clamped down on the slide and ejection port of the pistol in a C-clamp grip, a move designed to cause a catastrophic jam if the man fired again. Simultaneously, his right hand, open and flat, delivered 3 palm-heel strikes with blurring speed. They weren't wild swings, they were anatomical targets. Whap! To the sternum, to momentarily stop the heart's rhythm and steal the breath. Whap! To the jaw, to rattle the brain inside the skull. Whap! To the bridge of the nose, sending a blinding, searing bolt of pain through the man's sinuses and flooding his eyes with tears. The leader grunted, his body seizing. His weapon, still held in Elias's expert grip, was useless. His vision swam. His world collapsed into a universe of pain and confusion. He sagged, his knees giving way. Elias calmly twisted the gun from his nerveless fingers, stepped back, and ejected the magazine, clearing the chamber with a practiced efficiency that was terrifying in its speed. 3 down. Silence. Not a quiet moment, but a profound and absolute void of sound. The rain hammering on the windows, the hum of the ice machine, the frantic beeping of a forgotten heart monitor. But from the people, nothing. Every staff member, every patient, every security guard was frozen, statues carved from fear and disbelief. They stared at the scene. 3 armed men, neutralized, groaning on the floor. And standing over them, breathing calmly, was the ghost. He held the leader's pistol in one hand, the empty magazine in the other. His shabby scrubs were untorn, his expression unreadable. He looked down at the pieces of the weapon in his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Then he looked up, his pale blue eyes sweeping the room. He was no longer a ghost. He was the most solid, the most real thing in the entire hospital, and nobody knew what to do. The vacuum of silence held for a heartbeat, then shattered into 1,000 pieces of human noise. A woman started sobbing hysterically. A patient began to pray out loud. The uninjured security guard, Dave, finally unholstered his weapon, his hands shaking so badly he looked more likely to shoot himself than anyone else. The aftermath was a tableau of chaos. The leader of the gunmen was spitting blood, trying to push himself up. The wiry one was cradling his broken arm, a shard of white bone protruding grotesquely from the skin of his forearm. The big one remained unconscious. And a new problem. The wild shot fired by the leader had ricocheted off a steel door frame. The security guard stationed near the pharmacy, a young man named Peterson, was down, clutching his leg, a dark stain spreading rapidly across his uniform trousers. This was the moment for a leader to emerge. And Dr. Alistair Finch, seeing the immediate threat was over, decided that leader was him. He scrambled out from behind the potted plant, his face flushed, his hair disheveled. His terror, having found no purchase, had curdled into a righteous, blustering rage. He saw the downed men, the terrified staff, and Elias standing there, a gun still in his hand. "What have you done?" Finch shrieked, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and fury. He pointed a trembling finger at Elias. "You insane old man! You could have gotten us all killed! You assaulted them!" He seemed to have forgotten, in his panic, that the men had been holding the entire room hostage. "Security! Arrest this man! He's a menace!" But Dave, the portly guard, just stared at Elias with a mixture of terror and profound awe, his own gun held limply at his side. The thought of trying to arrest the man who had just dismantled 3 gunmen in less time than it took to tie a shoe seemed ludicrous. "Officer down!" a nurse shouted, rushing to Peterson's side. "He's bleeding heavily!" The cry for medical help seemed to reboot Finch's brain. This was his domain. "Out of the way!" he commanded, pushing through the stunned staff to get to the fallen guard. "I'm in charge here!" He knelt beside Peterson, his movements jerky and uncertain. He saw the wound, a nasty tear in the thigh, and the pulsing flow of arterial blood. "Pressure! I need pressure!" he yelled. "Somebody get me a tourniquet!" Nurse Brenda, ever the loyal sycophant, scrambled to a trauma cart and returned with a standard-issue cat tourniquet. Finch snatched it from her. He fumbled with the strap, his expensive Rolex catching on the fabric. He tried to apply it to the leg, but in his flustered state, he placed it too low, directly over the knee joint, and failed to tighten it enough to stop the bleeding. The dark stain on Peterson's pants continued to spread at an alarming rate. "It's not working," the nurse cried out. The monitor they'd wheeled over showed Peterson's blood pressure in a free fall. 70/40. 65/35. He was circling the drain. Finch, his face slick with sweat, only pulled harder on the strap, his knuckles white. "It needs to be tighter," he grunted, his incompetence now on full, fatal display for everyone to see. He was no longer a doctor trying to save a life. He was a panicked man trying to plug a dike with his finger. Elias had remained still through all of this. He had methodically placed the cleared weapon and its magazine on his desk, his movements deliberate and calm. He watched Finch's pathetic, dangerous efforts. He watched the life draining out of the young guard's face. He saw the numbers on the monitor, a countdown to death. And he felt that old, familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The weight of responsibility. The choice. To remain the ghost and watch a man die, or to step into the light and break the promise he had made to himself years ago. He closed his eyes for a single second. He saw the faces of the men he couldn't save. He heard their last words. He smelled the dust and the blood. When he opened his eyes again, the choice had been made. There was no choice at all, really. There never had been. He started to move. He didn't run. He walked. He walked past the cowering patients, past the stunned nurses, and straight towards Dr. Finch, a man who was about to kill a patient out of sheer, pathetic pride. The ghost was gone. Sergeant Major Vance was on deck. Elias didn't shout. He didn't push. He moved with an unnerving calm that was more commanding than any yell. He walked directly into the small circle of panic around the wounded guard and knelt on the other side of the injured leg, opposite Finch. "He's bleeding out," Elias said. The change was stunning. The voice was not the quiet, airy rasp everyone knew. It was a baritone, low and clear, resonating with an authority that seemed to vibrate in the air. The rasp was a ghost, banished by the force of his will. "That tourniquet is useless. It's on the joint, and it's not tight enough. You're not stopping the bleed. You're just trapping venous blood in the limb. You're going to kill him." The words were not delivered as an insult. They were a simple, cold statement of fact. For a moment, Finch was too stunned by the transformation to speak. The timid receptionist was gone, replaced by this stranger with eyes of ice and a voice of steel. Then his ego reasserted itself. "How dare you?" he sputtered, his face turning a blotchy red. "I am the head of this department. I give the orders here." "And your orders are incompetent," Elias replied, his gaze unwavering. He didn't wait for permission. His hands became a blur of motion. With one swift movement, he unfastened Finch's poorly applied tourniquet. He then ripped the fabric of Peterson's trouser leg higher, exposing the top of the thigh. "Femoral artery is hit. You need to go high and tight." He snatched the tourniquet, repositioned it correctly, high up in the groin, and cinched it with a brutal efficiency. He twisted the windlass until the bleeding slowed to a mere trickle. "Now pack the wound." He reached into a nearby trauma kit, his hand unerringly finding a roll of combat gauze. He began feeding it deep into the wound cavity, his movements precise and practiced. The nurses, who had been frozen in deference to Finch, now watched Elias, their eyes wide. They saw a level of competence, a sheer, unhesitating mastery that they had never witnessed before, not even from the best surgeons. Finch was on his feet now, trembling with rage and humiliation. "I will not be countermounted by a janitor. Security, remove this man. I'll have you arrested for assault," he shrieked, his voice shrill. "Get me 2 units of O-negative blood on a pressure infuser," Elias commanded, ignoring Finch completely. "And prep trauma 1. We're going to need to do a direct repair or a ligation. Page whoever is on call for vascular surgery." The nurses, faced with a choice between a shrieking, incompetent doctor and a calm, commanding stranger who was actively saving a man's life, made their decision. They scrambled to follow Elias's orders. Finch was left standing alone, a king without a kingdom, his authority evaporated. It was at that exact moment that the main ER doors, which had been locked down, were thrown open with a violent crash. A full SWAT team, clad in black tactical gear and brandishing rifles, flooded into the room, fanning out with disciplined precision. But behind them, moving with an aura of absolute power that made even the SWAT operators seem like subordinates, was a man in a crisp army dress uniform. Stars glittered on his shoulders. He was a two-star general, his face a granite mask of command, his eyes sweeping the scene with cold, analytical appraisal. This was General Marcus Thorne. Thorne's gaze took in everything in an instant, the downed gunman being cuffed by his lead team, the terrified civilians, Dr. Finch standing red-faced and sputtering, and the small group working frantically on the wounded guard. His eyes passed over the scene, and then they snapped back, locking onto the man kneeling on the floor, the man with the shabby scrubs and the blood-soaked hands. The general's ironclad expression faltered. His jaw went slack. The granite mask cracked, revealing a flicker of stunned disbelief, then a wave of something else entirely. Shock, relief, and a profound, unmistakable reverence. He took a hesitant step forward, his voice, when it came, a low, gravelly rumble that cut through all other noise. "My God," he whispered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. He moved past his men, his eyes never leaving Elias. "Ghost?" the general said, the name a question, a prayer. "Sergeant Major Vance? Is that you? We thought you were dead." The silence that fell upon the emergency room was deeper and more profound than before. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. Every head turned, every pair of eyes swiveled between the imposing two-star general and the quiet receptionist he had just called Sergeant Major. The name, the rank, hung in the air, an impossible, electrifying fact. Dr. Finch, however, saw not a revelation, but an opportunity. Here was a true authority figure, a man of power he could appeal to, someone who would surely understand the importance of hierarchy and discipline. He puffed out his chest, straightened his disheveled coat, and strode towards the general. "General, thank God you're here," Finch began, his voice oozing a desperate, cloying sincerity. "This situation was under control until this man," he pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at Elias, "went completely insane. He's some kind of maniac. He brutally assaulted these men." He gestured to the groaning gunman being hauled away. "And then he interfered with my treatment of that wounded officer. He is a danger to my patients and my staff. He needs to be arrested immediately." General Thorne did not so much as glance at Finch. His entire world had narrowed to the man on the floor. Elias, for his part, had not looked up. He was focused on his patient, tying off the gauze packing. Finally, he finished, looked at the stable vitals on the monitor, and gave a slight nod. He met the general's gaze. "The Zangali Pass incident," Thorne said, his voice thick with emotion. "They said you were overrun. The embassy siege in Khartoum. They told us there were no survivors from the extraction team. It was you, wasn't it?" Elias rose slowly, his bad legs stiff. He gave a slight, weary nod. "Had to go quiet for a while, sir. It got loud." The simple understatement carried the weight of 1,000 untold horrors. It was only then that Thorne's gaze finally shifted, falling upon Dr. Finch. The warmth and shock vanished, replaced by a coldness so intense it seemed to lower the temperature of the room. It was the look of a predator that has just noticed an annoying insect. "You're calling Sergeant Major Elias Vance a maniac?" Thorne asked, his voice dangerously soft.
"He's a receptionist,"
Finch insisted, his voice rising to a shrill whine. "His name is Elias Vance. He files papers. He makes coffee. He's a nobody." "This receptionist," Thorne's voice suddenly boomed, a parade ground command that made the windows vibrate and Finch physically flinch. The sound silenced the entire hospital. "This nobody," the general continued, stepping towards Finch, each step a hammer blow, "is the single most decorated combat medic in the last 50 years of United States military history. He holds the Medal of Honor for his actions at Zangali Pass, where he single-handedly defended a casualty collection point for 72 hours against an overwhelming enemy force. He also holds 2 Distinguished Service Crosses and more silver and bronze stars for valor than you have hairs on your head." Thorne was now inches from Finch's face. The doctor was visibly trembling, his arrogant facade crumbling into dust. "The man he is currently saving," Thorne went on, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl, "is a local police officer. But 6 years ago in Afghanistan, the man I was, a colonel at the time, was declared killed in action after my convoy was ambushed. My team was wiped out. I was bleeding out in a ditch, and this nobody, callsign Ghost, crawled through half a mile of open, fire-swept terrain to get to me. He kept me and 3 of my wounded men alive for 3 days with a shattered leg, a single rifle, and a medical kit the size of a lunchbox, until reinforcements could break through. He is not a maniac. He is a living legend, a hero. And you had him answering your goddamn phones." The weight of the general's words was a physical force, crushing Finch where he stood. The color drained completely from his face, leaving it a pasty, grayish white. Nurse Brenda, who had been standing nearby, took a step back, as if proximity to Finch was now toxic. Every sycophant, every aide who had ever laughed at Finch's jokes at Elias's expense now stared at their feet, consumed with a sudden, profound shame. "You tried to have him arrested," Thorne said, his voice now filled with a quiet, lethal contempt. "While he was saving a man's life from your own staggering incompetence. I was at the door for the last 2 minutes. I watched you fumble that tourniquet. I heard your orders. You're not just a bully, Doctor. You're a hazard. You are a disgrace to your profession and to the title you hold." Thorne turned his head slightly. "Colonel," he barked to an aide standing behind him, "get this man's name. I want his medical license brought up for immediate review by every state and federal board in this country by sunrise tomorrow. I want a full investigation into this hospital's administration. And get him out of my sight." 2 stone-faced military policemen stepped forward. They didn't touch Finch, but their presence was enough. The doctor gave a small, whimpering sob. He looked around wildly, seeking an ally, a friendly face, but found only condemnation and disgust in the eyes of his staff. His career, his reputation, his entire world had been publicly and comprehensively dismantled in less than 5 minutes. He turned, a broken man, and allowed the MPs to escort him out of the ER, his pristine white coat now looking like a funeral shroud. The walk of shame was long, silent, and absolute. With Finch's toxic presence removed, the very air in the ER seemed to change. The frantic, panicked energy was replaced by a quiet, focused intensity. Elias was the undisputed center of gravity. He didn't raise his voice or issue grand proclamations. He simply turned back to his patient. "Let's move him to Trauma 1, he commanded, his voice calm and steady. Gently. The staff, who moments ago were paralyzed by fear and confusion, jumped into action. It was as if a spell had been broken. They moved with a newfound purpose, their actions guided by the quiet confidence of their unexpected leader. Dr. Chen, Nurse Brenda, and 2 other nurses worked as a seamless unit, transferring the wounded guard, Peterson, onto a gurney and wheeling him towards the trauma bay. Inside the glass-enclosed room, Elias was not a receptionist or a soldier. He was purely a healer, but a healer forged in the unforgiving furnace of combat. He moved with an economy of motion that was breathtaking to watch. Every action had a purpose. There was no hesitation, no wasted energy. "Scalpel, 10 blade," he said, holding out his hand. "Doctor," Chen slapped it into his palm without a word. "Suction here. I need to visualize the artery." He worked quickly. His hands, the same hands that had trembled while holding a coffee cup, now impossibly steady as they navigated the complex landscape of muscle and tissue. More lap pads. "Vitals?" "BP is stabilizing at 95/60. Heart rate, 110. Brenda answered, her voice crisp and professional. The sycophant was gone, replaced by a damn good nurse. "Good. He's responding," Elias murmured. "I need 4-0 proline suture. We're in luck. It's a clean tear, not a transection. I can repair it." General Thorne stood in the corner of the room, out of the way, his arms crossed over his broad chest. With him were 2 of his own combat medics, elite operators in their own right. They didn't offer to help. They watched, their expressions a mixture of awe and humility. They were watching a master at his craft, a legend they had only heard about in stories, and they knew they were witnessing something sacred. Elias worked in a focused silence for several minutes, his fingers moving in a delicate, intricate dance of clamping, suturing, and tying off. He found the torn femoral artery, his movements precise as a watchmaker's. He repaired the vessel with a series of tiny, perfect stitches. He checked for leaks, found none, and then began to close the wound layer by layer. The bleeding had stopped completely. The monitors displayed a steady, healthy rhythm. The crisis was over. He stepped back from the table, peeling off his bloody gloves and dropping them into a biohazard bin. He looked at the stable, breathing patient on the table, then at the team around him. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion was settling into him, but the tired slump in his shoulders was gone, replaced by the straight-backed posture of a man who knew his worth. Dr. Chen, the young resident, looked at Elias, his eyes shining. "That was incredible, sir. I've read about that kind of direct arterial repair in textbooks, but I've never seen it done outside an operating room. Never that fast." Elias met his gaze and saw not just admiration, but the spark of a truly dedicated doctor. He allowed a rare, faint smile to touch the corners of his lips. "You did good, Doctor. You kept your head when it mattered. You identified the deviation. That's what saved him." The simple words of praise were like a benediction. Chen stood a little taller. Nurse Brenda approached him next, her face pale, her hands twisting the hem of her scrubs. "Mr. Vance, Sergeant Major, She struggled for words, her usual glibness having deserted her. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For how we treated you. For what we said. We were awful." Elias looked at her, his expression softening slightly. He saw the genuine remorse in her eyes. "Just do your job, nurse," he said, his voice gentle. "Take care of your patients. That's all that matters." It was both forgiveness and a directive, and she nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Finally, General Thorne walked up to him, the sound of his dress shoes loud on the tile. He placed a heavy, paternal hand on Elias's shoulder. "It's good to have you back from the dead, son," he said, his gravelly voice filled with a warmth that few ever heard. Elias let out a long breath, the sound raspy once more. "It was quiet, sir," he said, the words carrying a world of meaning. "Quiet's overrated," Thorne replied with a gruff smile. "Chaos is where we're needed. The world still needs men like you, Ghost. It always has." Elias looked around the ER, at the faces of the people he had just saved, at the staff now looking at him with reverence. For the first time in years, he felt like he was home. 6 months later, the Northwood General Emergency Department was unrecognizable. The transformation was absolute. The perpetually flickering fluorescent light that had once given the room a sickly, jaundiced glow had been replaced with a modern, bright LED system that was easier on the eyes. The grimy linoleum floors, with their permanent stains and scuff marks, had been torn out and replaced with pristine, non-slip, medical-grade tiling. The duct-tape chairs were gone, supplanted by new, comfortable seating. An influx of state-of-the-art equipment, new vital signs monitors, advanced trauma carts, even a portable CT scanner had appeared, all funded by a sudden and massive grant from the Department of Defense, given in honor of a newly appointed, distinguished veteran consultant. The entire ER hummed with a quiet efficiency it had never known. The ghost of Dr. Alastair Finch had been thoroughly exorcised. His public humiliation was only the beginning. The investigation sparked by General Thorne had uncovered a pattern of negligence, malpractice, and billing fraud that was staggering in its scope. Faced with a mountain of lawsuits and the permanent revocation of his medical license in all 50 states, Finch was ruined. The Rolex, the Italian shoes, the pristine white coat, all were gone. The last anyone heard, he was working as a mid-level sales representative for a generic pharmaceutical company in another state. A handsome face peddling cheap pills, his name a cautionary tale whispered among the Northwood staff. General Thorne had kept his word. He had offered Elias anything he wanted. A prestigious director position at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, a lucrative lead instructor role for the next generation of pararescue jumpers and Special Forces medics, or a quiet, comfortable, and fully funded retirement on a beach somewhere, a final reward for a lifetime of service and sacrifice. Elias had listened patiently to all the offers, a flicker of gratitude in his tired eyes. And then he had politely refused them all. He chose to stay. He was no longer at the reception desk. A plaque on the wall now read, "Elias Vance, Director of Emergency and Trauma Medicine." He didn't occupy Finch's old, ostentatious office. He took a small, functional space near the trauma bays. He didn't wear a suit or even a white coat, just a pair of clean, simple, navy blue scrubs that fit him properly. His limp was still there, a constant companion, but now people saw it for what it was, not a sign of weakness, but a visible testament to the price of heroism. His voice was still quiet, but now people leaned in to listen, hanging on every word. The scene finds him on a Tuesday night, in the gleaming, renovated Trauma Bay 1, the very same room where he had been publicly humiliated by Finch. He was standing beside a nervous young intern, the new, more confident doctor, Chen, calmly guiding her through the intricate process of inserting a central line into a patient. His voice was patient, a low and steadying murmur beneath the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. "Easy now. Watch your depth. Feel for the pop as you enter the subclavian vein," he instructed. "You're not threading a needle, you're guiding it home. You've got this." The young doctor's hands, which had been trembling slightly, steadied under his calm tutelage. She advanced the needle, got a flash of dark blood, and successfully threaded the guide wire. A wave of profound relief washed over her face. "I'm in. Thank you, Dr. Vance." "Call me Elias," he said, the words quiet but firm, a simple instruction that dismantled the hierarchy he so despised. As he stepped back, Nurse Brenda, now the head charge nurse of the ER, approached him with a patient chart. The old, nervous energy was gone, replaced by a deep, professional respect. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared memory of that terrible, transformative night. She was one of his best nurses, loyal, efficient, and fiercely protective of him and their patients. "Elias," she said, "ambulance is 5 minutes out. GSW to the chest. They've started a transfusion in the field." "All right," he said, taking the tablet from her. "Let's be ready for them. Prep the bay." He was in his element, a conductor leading a symphony that finally played in perfect harmony. Later, as his shift ended, he walked out through the automatic doors into the cool night air. The rain had stopped. The city was quiet. He stood there for a moment, looking up at the stars, a rare sight in the city's glow. For 3 years, he had felt like a ghost, a phantom haunting the edges of the world, desperately seeking peace in anonymity. But he had been wrong. Peace wasn't found in hiding. It was found in purpose. He had tried to bury the warrior, to silence the ghosts of his past, only to discover that the healer could not truly exist without him. He was whole again. He took a deep breath, the air clean and fresh. His limp felt less pronounced tonight. He started the walk to his modest apartment, no longer a spectre drifting through the shadows, but a man walking in the light. The world is full of quiet heroes, he thought. They are hidden in plain sight, in shabby scrubs and tired eyes, in thankless jobs and unseen corners. They aren't waiting for a crisis to reveal their worth. They are simply waiting for us to have the wisdom to see them in the first place. You just have to know where to look.